This is fine. This is fine. This is a poor substitute for therapy, but an excellent substitute for other podcasts.
We're not like other podcasts.
Join us as we find the answers to the universe's biggest questions like, is butter a carb? Does crying burn calories? And what the fuck am I doing with my life? We're here to be your part-time therapist, astrologer, concierge doctor, and fairy godmother. Do you need someone to validate you today? Cool. Come on in. We're fine. This is fine. Welcome back. And again, happy holidays, my beautiful listeners. I am so glad you've carved some time out of your day for another therapy session on This Is Fine. Today, we've got therapist Jason Maas, New York-based mind, body, soul psychotherapist and expert in somatic therapy. If you're not sure what that last term means, that's great because that's our topic du jour. Somatic Therapy 101. What is it, who needs it, and how it can change your life? I'm so grateful that Jason has joined us on a call today from New York so he can impart this beautiful practice and share a new way of healing with all of us. We're going to learn about the disconnection between our brains and bodies and how we can find clues in our bodies that help us heal. We'll also get into how to start your somatic therapy journey today while you're listening to this very podcast. All right, let's do it. All right, Jason, thank you so much for joining us here on This Is Fine. We are so honored to have you. Thank you for bringing your presence, your energy, and imparting this new wisdom with all of our listeners. We're so grateful. Thank you.
It's really great to be here. Thank you.
So let's just jump right in. I would love for you to give our listeners more of a background on your training, how you got into somatic therapy, how you got into therapy in general. Just take it from the top wherever you would like to.
Sure. I consider myself an integrated mind, body, soul psychotherapist. And the mind, the body, and the soul kind of represent three elements that I'm weaving together in my work all the time, and also reflect on my life's path of coming to being a therapist and the different trainings and approaches that I had in first training in psychoanalysis, and then somatic psychotherapy, and then energetic, ancestral, and spiritual psychotherapy. And I would say that my formal training to become a therapist, therapy was actually my third career. My first career was an elementary school art teacher that gave me a foundational understanding of the ways in which adults are just big kids and needed the same love and attention and care that we do when we're little, and gave me an understanding of developmental psychology for sure. And I was also very much at the time really dedicated to the art of portraiture. I studied all over the world as a painter and a draftsman, and didn't realize at the time, but now understand now that the kind of the microanalysis of how people hold themselves and the muscles around the face and our posture really helped set me up to understand, the somatics of how to work with people and be a presence for them to help them bring more awareness to how they hold their bodies. And it wasn't until in my second career as an arts nonprofit founder, where I was tasked with helping artists volunteer in their communities and then make art about it and support their art through grants, residencies, and shows, that through that process of putting on art shows, art show after art show, and realizing that I actually wasn't interested in the art that I was helping support. I was interested in the well-being of the artist himself, and realized it wasn't as much about the art as much as I love, creativity and expression as the fundamental, foundational human needs. And I love to nourish and inspire that in people. I really deeply care about the person as a whole. And went back to school, went to Brooklyn College, and got my degree in counseling. And in that time, the did my clinical internship at a psychoanalytic institute, which is about as cognitive as one can get and mind-based, and found a lot of tools there, a lot of real wisdom there, but also found a lot of challenges, problems, and antiquated ideas that I didn't agree with.
Yeah, I bet,
And did my postgraduate work getting my licensure with a man named Daniel Cook, which had a somatic psychotherapy practice. And he holds the lineages of Narobi University, which is one of the top places to study somatic psychotherapy in the country. And got a really deeper understanding of that work. And somatic psychotherapy encapsulates a great deal of how I work. And I can go into this.
If you're listening at home right now and you don't know what somatic therapy means, we are going to get into that. Jason, I love that your background incorporates this mixture of looking at human beings in child form and then seeing people as children as they age, just like little kids in these adult bodies running around. And then the portraiture, like you brought up, I think is such a beautiful metaphor for human beings in general, like who we are captured by a portrait. It's such a beautiful, I want to say like tactile or visual representation of the abstract. And then moving into the therapeutics and like seeing people in their verbal, like most raw states. Did you always know that you wanted to do somatic therapy once you made that pivot into therapy? Was that introduced to you before you got into therapy, during your schooling? When did that come into your field?
Yeah, I was not introduced to it at first. And they buried the course later on in my studies at Brooklyn College. I was really interested in object relations work, which kind of came out of psychoanalysis, and then took this, which I'm still very interested in, but it's only become a facet of the integrated model that I have. I took a class with this awesome teacher, as you know, things seem to often go in this world. When we have an awesome teacher, it can really change the course of our life. And her name is Karen Weidenmuller, and she had this wonderful presence, just deeply embodied and caring and soft, but also really clear. And I just really, really liked her energy and was able to learn that she practiced this way of being that was also how her therapy was, of being very embodied and very aware of how she was holding herself and mindful. And that led me on a path of wanting to understand more, learn more, and do that kind of work in the world.
That's so beautiful. I love that you were inspired by someone who is really like walking the walk and not just, talking about it, but literally practicing what she was preaching. I think those are always the best kinds of teachers.
Me too.
So in terms of what somatic therapy is, let's break that down for anyone who doesn't understand the concept. My non-therapeutic background, I'm like, oh, it's connecting the brain and the body. Can we talk about a little bit of what it really is and the actual connection between the brain and the body, maybe how we became disconnected between those two things?
Sure, yeah. So I would say, for our listeners, traditional talk therapy, I would say, is more mind-based. In some ways, the two main schools of traditional talk therapy, there is this psychoanalytic institute that was really kind of pioneered and propped up by Sigmund Freud. And then there was the cognitive behavioral that came some decades later. And in some ways, those two schools of thought were the prevailing schools of thought for the next 50 years in certain ways.
Right.
Some of the somatic work did come rife, and these folks that were in the time, but they didn't really get their due. And it wasn't really until the 70s, 80s that some folks started kind of codifying stuff and naming it, and really in some ways hasn't grown in popularity until this past decade in certain ways.
Totally.
As a means of really popularized means of helping people. And I would say that that talk therapy, traditional talk therapy anyway, is about really, excavating and understanding your thoughts, the behaviors that come out of those thoughts, the consequences that come out of those behaviors, the family history that you have, the stories that you hold, the story about who you have been told you are, or told yourself you are, and who you'll never be. And it's about really understanding that process and bringing awareness to those thoughts will then allow for choice. That's in some ways how the process goes. And there's so much wisdom in that. And that we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say that one of these are any better than any of the others. But right. I would say that if we stop there, we miss so much.
Right. It's like we have this beautiful tool. Why would you only use, like, if you have like a whole toolkit that's got like a hammer and a screwdriver and some pliers, but you like only use the hammer, like you're missing out these other tools. Maybe this is a bad metaphor, but
that's right. That's exactly right.
And okay, cool. I'm like, is the student grasping the concept? Like, for anyone listening who's also a student with me. So I love that this is yet another access point to what we need to discover about ourselves, how we can heal ourselves, what we can truly live in and embody, whether you're accessing it from the physical quote unquote symptom or experience first, or the more mental, psychological, emotional experience first. You explain this really well, how both are entry points into somatic healing.
That's right. Yeah, we can. So, in some ways, the somatic being the moment-to-moment awareness of our whole body, the ability to know that our body has held our experience, that has held the history of our life, that has held the history of our ancestry too, that our ancestral, what our ancestors learned, what our ancestors struggled with, we inherit in our bodies too. So that's a further piece to this. But even just in our own lifetime, there's something that resides. There's an intelligence in the body that we miss if we think of this as just a neck up approach.
Right.
And so we might be able to kind of go from the mind into the body. If someone is maybe feeling really activated, and they may be talking about what's activating them, I may be cued into wanting, that they're saying, I'm feeling, so much remorse and regret for how it all happened the other night, and I feel like I always do this, and this is like how I'm always going to live, and this is how I'm always going to be. And I might just say, like, can we just slow this down a little bit? Like, as you're saying this, like, how do you feel in your body? What's happening? Where do you, I might like kind of tune into their posture, and they may be all caved in, and they may say that their heart feels really tight and heavy, and so I may just be. Let's just be there. Let's be with the tightness in the heart. What does it feel like? If you could kind of visualize it as like the edges of this tightness? Does it feel spiky? Does it feel cloudy? Does it have a texture to it? Does it have a sound to it? Does it have like a directionality that it wants to move? Does it want to move like up into your throat? Does it want to move down into your gut? Just I might throw lots of different kind of ways we may see the quote unquote tension in our body. I might also ask to just maybe bring up a memory of when they might have first felt this. We might go back to some memory of childhood, and then we might go back into the story about that's the moment where they believe that they were inherently bad, and we may find these kind of clues that bring us back into these earlier moments of being. And then it's just the interesting phenomenon that when we're able to give something voice, it's able to be released, able to let something go, this belief that we we incurred, or maybe someone told us that we believed. And it's only through this kind of working with the mind and the body that we can actually identify this stuff.
There are potentially a lot of clues that are being stored in our body that we aren't even aware of, that if we do tune into them, we can heal and grow and be more present in ourselves and our relationships, but we just weren't aware of it. So by connecting, like you said, everything from the neck up with everything from the neck down, we might be able to access things we weren't even aware were an issue.
That's right.
Cool. I would love to dive a little deeper into why we did separate everything from the neck up. And we talked about this before offline, where if you are using your insurance, it might be like Blue Shield for your physical health insurance and Magellan for your mental health insurance. Those are two separate things in the American healthcare system, but truly one and the same. And I know we've already had this conversation, you and me, but I would love for our listeners to get a little history lesson, a little flavor, cultural context of why we do separate the brain and the rest of the body, why I'll go to, a cardiologist and get that all covered for my heart with my normal American health insurance. But when it comes to, talking through a trauma, I have to go through a completely different network. It's totally separated.
That's right. We can thank Descartes, perhaps, the late 17th century philosopher, to help kind of codify this system into a philosophical school of thought that then we're able to, the church and state were able to utilize in different ways, and has become, in some ways, ultimately, I think, a method of control to separate the dualism, the mind and the body. That there were, those who had the mind, those who had thoughts, and there were those that didn't, and like those had the power. So I think there's like a systemic connection to this, and also I think it predates further back. I see this separation of mind and body. It's
not just Descartes' fault.
No, actually, for better or for worse, it's not. I see this separation, need to separate things as a trauma response of a world that's really still reeling from this idea of civilization, which is really in some ways the creation of colonies throughout the indigenous world. And that this process is a process of separation, that the colony is separate from the land around it. The practices of the colony are separate from the indigenous practices around it. The people are separated, and into different strata. And there's just so many layers to this, to how the separation has incurred really a real devastation on the human family and on our kind of inability to thrive together. And one of the ways that this works is the separation has happened in our own bodies. And there's so many ways in which we separate things and rationalize them. And, what I like to say is people are proud of being rational, and I think that there's a value in rationalism. I very, very much do, but also, to think that rationalism is all there is to live on rations. I mean, you're literally rationing. You're separating out this little bit from the rest in order to try to maintain a sense of order, and therefore we can't subsist on all that there is. So all this is to say that somatic, kind of uniting the body and the mind, is a way to help ease, and kind of bring the scope back. We can look at it from thousands of years, but we can also look at it just in the day-to-day of just feeling disconnected, feeling anxious. I like to think of the different parts of our body as like different radio stations, and we're tuned into the radio station of our head all the time, and the different kind of thoughts that are just cycling and circling around, but we're not tuned into the radio station of the heart to say, what is our heart saying right now? We do have that vocabulary listen to your heart, listen to your gut. But how often do we actually do that, and do we know how? Is a big part of my work to help people to do that.
Beautiful.
And it's there.
I love that you brought up the idea of unity, because as you were saying this, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is such a bigger scope. Like, this is one piece of the separation puzzle that you just went into. The antidote to separation is obviously unity. And it feels like somatic therapy is the antidote to the separation of our brains and bodies, which obviously, from everything that we just laid out, is a deeply entrenched cultural thing. But the way that it transpires in our bodies can be, in my mind, one example is the separation of our head and our stomach while we're eating. We could be eating and eating and eating, but our stomach catches up later, right? And it's like, wait, you went way too far. Or the opposite. I could be so in my head, I'm just dragging myself for a second. I could be so in my head working on something that I forget that I need to eat or go to the bathroom because I'm not at all tuned into my physicality. I'm just head. And I know I'm not the only person. I know a lot of people will relate to that as well. But it's sort of like a symptom or the aftermath of everything that you just outlined. So ideally, somatic therapy would be the remedy to this.
It's a very powerful one, for sure.
So I know that you have started with a lot of your clients, your patients, with just looking at breathing. And we've talked about how this is a really nice access point, sort of a somatic therapy 101 for people listening at home, whether they're walking or sitting down, hopefully not driving while we're about to do an exercise. But this would be a really nice physical first person way for someone to experience what somatic therapy is. Do you want to walk through that practice a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I would say that early in work with someone, what I might check in with them about is how they breathe. And I think that we are trained to breathe incorrectly, especially with our need to maintain an image of having a flat stomach. It's very natural for us to kind of be tensing our stomach and holding our stomach in. And I find that people can breathe backwards as a result. And I might just spend some time to saying, well, let's just do a little breathing. And it's called 3-part breath. And so there's you can imagine 3 parts to the lungs. That there's the bottom of the lungs. So if we take a breath in, the bottom of our lungs can fill up first, like a balloon. We can put a hand on over our belly button. The middle of our lungs will inflate next. That's our rib cage. You put a hand there. And then the base of the lungs is like the top of the throat, the base of the throat. So the 3 points are like over your belly button, your rib cage, and the base of the throat. So let's try to just do that 3-part breath. A nice comfortable seat. So we'll take a nice deep breath in, inflating the base of our lungs, our belly button, like a balloon. And you can move the hand to the rib cage, feeling the rib cage expand. And you can move your hand to the base of the throat, feeling that clavicular breath at the top of the lungs, and then let it all out. We'll just do this a few more times, just finding your own rhythm of belly breath, the rib cage, and the base of the throat. And you might find that certain areas may feel a little bit harder to breathe into. You may find this may feel relaxing. You may have challenges with this, and as a therapist, I'm always seeking to meet people right where they might be having a little bit of resistance or difficulty, because inside of that, if someone has a hard time breathing fully, to me that's evidence of a history with some kind of experience or circumstance that was either not conducive for relaxation or safety. And so I would just be with them in that, and I would want, they went home to, if kind of finding this challenging, to recognize that it's all part of the work, and this isn't like a right or wrong kind of thing. It's all just a process of getting to know our bodies and being, more in tune with them, because our bodies are in this natural kind of symphonic dance with our minds, and so our mind can send our body information to say, like, breathe shallow, And we find if we breathe shallow, it actually activates the stress response, this like fight, flight, freeze response that we may not be intending to activate, but are activating based on the way that we're breathing. And then we're in this constant state of stress, and we don't know why. And back in the days when we weren't separated from nature and did have apex predators that were hunting us down in the woods, it would be really important to be able to activate the body into an immediate, flight response by breathing shallow and running and climbing trees and doing whatever we had to do to evade a predator. But now, like Peter Levine says, that like the tiger is in our minds, and so we're constantly struggling, and we're constantly fleeing or fighting or freezing. And so learning to find these nice deep breaths is a simple way to bring more awareness to the body. And we hopefully spend some time, taking care of how we prepare our food. We eat, 3 meals a day. We breathe 21 to 24,000 times a day. And how are we preparing our breath? And that actually, this is a deep nourishment that if we're not nourishing ourselves, we're just like a plant that's being underwatered, and it'll droop. And so, understanding how we breathe is, I think, a quintessential part of understanding our mood.
Yeah, especially like you were saying, with this being part of the fight or flight response, right? Like you're giving your body instructions to be in this tiger's going to eat me mode just by breathing in a way that you may not even be aware of. So by paying more attention to the breath, you could be resetting your body a little bit into a more parasympathetic state, which in turn can have a domino effect on so many other parts of your life, whether it's how well you're sleeping or your what's the word I'm looking for? Your immune system, right? Like your immune system can be compromised by being in a consistently stressed state. There are so many different aspects of your health that may be able to change with this one little root, like one tip of the domino, by reassessing your breath and learning how to breathe in a more relaxing and restful way. I feel like this is such a beautiful entry point to understanding in a physical, experiential way, like what somatic therapy can do. And it's just the very tip of the iceberg, I feel. So you use somatic therapy not just by itself, but as a piece of a puzzle, piece of the therapeutic puzzle. If you were listening earlier, nice and attentive, you heard that he said mind, body, soul. Correct? So 3 parts, mind, body, soul?
That's
yeah.
right. Yes.
I was listening. So this is one part, a very special and integral part. Let's talk about how you use this in your unique approach as part of the 360 therapy, the Jason special recipe.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. So I would say, we've covered a little bit about working with the mind and the body, and I'll share a little bit about what I mean when I say working with soul. When I say soul, I mean that which connects this body to all that is beyond it. And so there's so many ways into that. One of the ways into that is we have the physical body, but we also have an energy body. And this body, in some ways, is an expression of the electricity in our body, an electromagnetic field of our body, the subtle body that is, matter is made up of energy. And so, we are made up of matter. So there's an energy body that's invisible, but yet I've found through my work incredibly tangible, because I can do the same exact meditations and offer the same tools to a vast variety of people and get similar results, which points to the evidence of something that I think science will catch up to. The yogis called it the aura. There's the chakra system. The chakras, line up with the glandular system. So the glandular system's like the nectar of the body, in these like points where there's all there's nerve bundles that are these like electrical centers. So they're kind of, in some ways, I think of it like different, like almost like different stars in this kind of constellation that is our body. And we're so tuned into the head all the time that we miss all this other information. And so in my work as a somatic psychotherapist, I was still finding that there were limitations to working with the body, and continued my trainings and my own explorations and developing meditations. I deeply feel a lot of the suffering in this world in my body. What's that about? Who's explaining this? How do we make sense of such a thing? And this is how I understand how soul can connect us. Like, it connects us to the collective experience. And so part of this work is, when we're feeling fear, whose fear are we feeling? This is a fundamental question in working with soul, because we can take on the feelings of others by living in these systems of families and communities and hemispheres, and we're who knows what, if you're feeling something that is your neighbors that you've never even introduced yourself to, because you're just living in such proximity to each other.
Right.
And so just opening up our scope of awareness to what's out there also, has offered people a great deal of help, especially sensitive people who can tend to be the ones that come to therapy, because this world is troubled, and some people are more suited to not feel. And that's resourcing in its own way. And there are, I think, in the human village, I think there are we need people who are steadier, who don't feel as much, because we kind of need a diverse amount of experiences to get the max. Diversity creates life. And so we need a diverse amount of human experiences inside of the human village. And for some people, that's going to feel less. But we're also living in a world that's trained us. And this is in some ways where the soul connects to the mind. Is still all those systems that we're living inside of, connect to the systems of oppression that are living, that have created this situation that we're living in, that have trained us and taught us to be obedient citizens, to judge each other, to blame one another, and have these kinds of really intense viewpoints that ultimately just continue to create more and more separation. And in some ways, it's like when humanity separates itself, it eats itself. And it's just kind of, we're like a herd species. It's almost like we're just kind of like a unique cow that's living in this one big herd as a human family. And when we start to destroy one another, the whole human family suffers. And this is my own experience of how to make sense of how we can feel so much suffering that's outside of our own life.
Right.
And so I'm just driven to help people to understand the systems also that we live in, the historical systems that have trained us to sacrifice ourselves, to not understand ourselves, and so that's kind of how the collective connects back to the mind, and so the mind, body, soul connects in kind of a circle to me. And so in a session, exactly, that I might just kind of be weaving all of those together. That we might be talking about a story about what happened in the week and how you were feeling really a lot of bitterness, and we might go into the heart, and then we might find a lot of tension there, and then we might do some energy work to help cultivate forgiveness and release the bitterness. And then we might, kind of connect it to the ways in which we were trained by our parents, and they were trained by their parents, and by their parents to hold a grudge. And then we might, be able to release that by just having that awareness. And we're kind of weaving those three together all the time. And, my hope is that people will come out of the work just feeling fully alive and like themselves. And I deeply believe that everyone has something to share in this world, and that we've just created so much conditioning and training to make people believe that they're worthless and that they're and then they do one of two things. The traumatized do one of two things. They either explode and they become the traumatizer, or they implode and they fall into depression and addiction. And I just see this happening all around me, and I just feel compelled to help.
Well, we're glad you're doing it. I'm glad you're doing it. I personally really relate, and I'm sure a lot of people listening right now do as well, just feeling so much of what other people are feeling. And when you were talking about those who can compartmentalize a little bit more and have trained themselves to not feel, like, what is that like? And obviously that does serve a purpose, like you said, but I can't help but wonder, and I would love to get your take on this. It's a little bit of a diversion from our topic, but it kind of feels to me a little bit like a symptom of patriarchal culture, in which we are told that emoting, like feeling emotions and expressing emotions, is feminine and therefore a weakness. And it's more celebrated to not feel. We're taught to not respect or appreciate emotion. Obviously, I'm coming from a little bit of a biased perspective as a woman and a very emotional individual. But it seems as though even the word vulnerability, it can be used in the context of, oh, it's very courageous to be vulnerable, right? Like you're showing some of yourself. That takes a lot of courage. Or let's target their vulnerability because that's their weak point. That's their Achilles heel. So it's looked at as something that should, in my opinion, be perceived as courage, is looked at as a weakness. Emoting, all of these things are feminine, are bad. We're trained to disconnect from those feelings, even as women. Men especially, I would say, all individuals. And then there's the separation there, and then there's the separation in our physical experience and our nerve feelings and our emotional feelings and our energetic feelings, because we're not supposed to feel, we're just supposed to do and produce.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is a part of the separation hierarchy has put thought on top of feeling.
Yeah.
And that there's the part of the trauma leads us to feel like, well, when we're emotional, we can't be trusted. That there's and this is, and I just see it. I don't fall for it. I just see it as a trauma response to having not been cared for when we felt so much.
Okay. So we can trust our emotions. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the question again comes back to whose emotions are we feeling? So
Okay.
it's not so simple. I would have, a general degree of openness and curiosity around thoughts and feelings, but I would see them as, as two vital components in the ecosystem of being a human being that live in harmony, that they're not in opposition the way that we're just constantly putting everything in opposition, which is also part of this disastrous kind of way in which we've kind of seen the world. And part about what I think my job, and I think this also relates to having started as an elementary school art teacher, is to see that I've noticed that the quality of mental health can reflect the quality of our imagination. And we're not given an inspiring world to grow up in. We're not, and in some ways, our choices devoid us of inspiration, and we could say hatred in its most extreme form is a failure of imagination, to imagine what actually could also be possible. And so
it's like linked with empathy almost.
Sure. The connection, empathy is, to imagine the feelings of another.
Right.
That takes a leap. And I really feel a purpose in my heart to help inspire people to imagine a world that inside of their minds can be can be caring and compassionate to themselves and to other people, and I think it's all possible. And I think that a lot of the stuff that we live inside of really can be removed, it can be released, it can be let go. I think our humanity is always there. I think it just gets buried underneath this stuff, and I found ways to really help and feel driven.
Somatic therapy can be one route back to one's humanity, back to healing.
That's right. That's right.
So,
yes.
is there anyone who wouldn't want to experience somatic therapy, or someone who should avoid it? Like, is it too triggering for anyone? Are there any risks? Or is this something that's kind of like generally recognized as safe and pretty good for everyone?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. And I would say that sadly, our bodies haven't always been safe places.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in some ways, there is something very resourcing about being able to be in our mind. And I've worked with people that I can tune into it quite quickly when I can tell that they need to be in their mind, and that's okay. And I welcome that. There's no it's not like you get a medal if you can do the mind, body, soul triathlon. It's all okay. It's wanting to meet people where they are at, and there's beauty in everything if we can just find it. So it's like let's figure out what's here for them, and maybe at a certain time they'll be ready to do this. And so it could be overwhelming, even to even maybe perhaps done the breath exercise. I want to make space that it's that even something so simple as just like being more embodied can bring up memories of when life wasn't so safe. And so it's really is important to be with someone who is really a therapist. And I really see like being a therapist as like a verb. Like you can get a title as a therapist, mm-hmm. but if you're not actually helping someone, if you're not actually healing, helping someone regain their humanity and their sense of balance, I don't think you're actually being a therapist. So I really encourage if folks are seeking a therapist that you don't feel like a deep connection with, to keep looking, and I assure you that they're out there.
Yep.
But it is really important to find someone that you really trust and that really is capable and prepared and ready to be a therapist. So I would say, be open to, if you feel like, being in your mind is just the place that you want to stay. If you haven't done any therapy, I would say, start with maybe some traditional talk therapy, get some awareness of the thoughts and, the different histories there. And maybe that therapist might have some somatic tools that they can weave in as you start to feel safe in the space. Or maybe seek someone else out who has some credentials and ultimately, but don't settle on credentials. Like it's all about the feeling when you're in the present.
Right. Like the therapist is more doing than being, right? Like they're walking the walk. They're proving that maybe proving's not the right word, but it's more of like the energy match, that they are like active in this relationship, not just credentialed, like you were saying.
That's right.
So this can be kind of a daunting experience for a lot of people, especially if they're feeling down or they're genuinely experiencing like bona fide depression or going through something else that would just present a challenge in finding a therapist. Do you have any suggestions for finding someone you connect with, any potential resources, especially if someone's interested in somatic therapy as well? I feel like this is a good point in our conversation to say, okay, now what? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, it's harder to find a good therapist than it's kind of like finding a friend in some ways, or even, scanning profiles can be like even like going on like going on an internet date. Like you can kind of like the photo, you can like what they say, but as soon as you meet them, that it's not going to work. and that's okay. I would trust your intuition, and it's okay to also to be open. I would say, it's also the first therapist that really ever I connected with. I had a few really terrible therapists through my early 30s and didn't think therapy worked.
The irony.
It's deep irony. But I had a therapist that would go on to change my life and help me to recognize that process that I was a therapist and had always been one. And for the first few weeks, I just wasn't sure because she was so calm and quiet that it was hard for me, with where I was at in my own development, to be able almost to trust that, because I just wasn't sure what she was thinking or so it took some time. So I would say that also there's a caveat to like when you might know immediately, because we're kind of bringing our own past projections into where we come, especially when we're not really aware of them. And so it didn't take that long, but it took a few sessions for me to actually relax and to be able to realize that there was a real deep sense of safety here, and a different sense of kind of a relational experience that I had never really had before. So I would encourage you to look around and to not stop trying. And to be brave. If you're interested in learning more about my work, I run a small practice of mind, body, soul psychotherapists who are doing some really profound work in the world. You can learn more about our work at shadowlightcenter.com.
And that's hyperlinked in the episode description, so you can click on that now if you want to check out more of Jason's practice and the other therapists. I know that you've mentioned to me as well that another resource specifically for somatic therapy, if people want to read more, Bessel van der Kolk, is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's that can be a really great accessible way into this work. His kind of seminal work, The Body Keeps the Score, could offer a way to read about and understand somatic therapy. So I find that as like an easy recommendation when someone is curious. And there certainly are resources online. There's books you can read. But I also think there's something about this there's a magic to it that kind of defies logic, that really just happens when one person is with another person and that person is so dedicated to listening and being with that person. There's something that just seems to happen in the human psyche that allows it to heal.
It's that connection too, right? There's another person involved. You're connecting versus going on this solo journey. Not to knock the solo journeys, but the theme of a lot of what we've been talking about is unity versus disconnection within the mind and body, with each other, with the planet, with other cultures. Like the antidote here is the unity and the connection. So it's cool on solo journeys and reading more, but like you were saying, the magic is really with the connection. One question from one of our listeners in the This Is Fine community. They are very interested in somatic therapy for healing maybe a physical issue that could possibly be connected to, obviously, an emotional experience, past experience. The question was, can I use somatic therapy to heal my IBS?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say somatic therapy will be an extremely valuable participant in the healing process. I would say that there is a correlation between having an anxious digestive system and an unchecked awareness of our own body. And so we manifest that anxiety I might really spend a lot of time with someone who's experiencing digestion issues about, what do you feel in your belly? I feel all this anxiety, let's stay with that. Wow. How can we help you with that? Because that anxiety creates tension. That tension can really just kind of wreak havoc. And it might also lead us to eat in different ways. And this is where somatic therapy also will be a component of this, because, it would be important to look at, what that person's eating, how they're eating it. Are they eating it in a stressed out state all the time? Or are they, are they eating all this food and washing it down with all this alcohol, and then, going to sleep and doing all these different things that are also kind of challenging the body's ability to heal. And so I would say that, we would want to look at the systems that are creating this to see what can change, and creating more awareness and peace and relaxation in the body as a whole is a factor. It's certainly not the only one, but it's a factor to help in different body-based ailments like IBS.
Amazing. This is great. I hope the listener at home is excited to try some somatic therapy as part of their healing journey as well. We do have an episode on hot girls with IBS if you need more information on that. Jason, thank you so much. This was such a beautiful talk. You have shared such an incredible practice. I know this is going to be an access point that changes so many people's lives. This introduction to a new way of healing and being and living and connecting. Thank you so much. We would love to have you on another episode soon.
Dominique, I'd love to be back.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey today. If you loved today's episode, we would be so grateful if you left us a 5-star review on whichever streaming platform you've chosen to listen on. We're taking a little break for the holidays, so don't forget to go back and check out our gift guide and favorite things of 2023 if you want to do a little holiday shopping, because teehee, capitalism. Kidding, obviously. Just go find your joy. We'll come back in the new year with a 2024 astro forecast from Shannon, so get excited for that. I'm also planning lots of American and France expat interviews and episodes for you. Let us know what else you want to hear. I'm fine at thisisfinepodcast.com. Happy holidays, my precious and beautiful angels. I am sending you the warmest hugs, love and light, gros bisous from Paris. I am off to eat a lot of tartiflette and raclette at the Christmas markets and see the Nutcracker Ballet at the Paris Opera. I'll let you know how it goes. See you soon. Merry Christmas. Joyeuses fêtes. À bientôt. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of This Is Fine. I've been your host, Dominique Michelle Astorino. We're based in San Diego, recording in studio at DLI Productions in Pacific Beach with Emmy Award-winning sound designer Dan De La Isla. This is a comedy and advice podcast, but for legal reasons, this entire podcast is a joke and none of it is medical advice. To download a transcript or learn more, visit thisisfinepodcast.com.